Hello, my name is Horrorama, and today I have found a few strange encounters people have experienced with the various mythical and supernatural forces of the world from various subreddits, and will be narrating them here. But before we begin, I did want to ask that if you end up enjoying my narrations, then please do consider liking and subscribing, as that really does help the channel a lot. But either way, without any further ado, let's get into the narrations. The first story has been posed by user interesting_C66. This is not my story, it's my best friend's, and with her permission, we would both love to share this. She sent this to me immediately after it happened. Here we go. It is from Emma's point of view. Me and Ali, my best friend since birth, decided to go to Backwell. If you don't know it, it is a very small area, just a few miles past Cadet, Missouri. It is considered very haunted, which really means there is a large amount of people who have had some insane stuff happen to them there and cannot explain it. So much has happened there, and if you are someone who feeds off or experiences paranormal activity stronger or differently than others, you almost feel sick just entering the area. The feeling of dread is so overwhelming and your throat gets tight. We wanted to go to the old Blackwell Upper Bridge, which was shut down in the 80s after a terrible car accident took place. The bridge is, in ways, still open to the public, but there are still random, awful accidents taking place. At about 12 a.m., and keep in mind that it was very dark and late, we turned on our GPS and tried to find this bridge, as we don't necessarily live close, we are just somewhat aware of the area. So our phones were charged and our GPS worked perfectly fine until we got about a mile out and everything stopped working. Our phones were acting weird and the GPS app shut itself off and would not let us open it. When it finally allowed us to click on the app, we typed in the address to the bridge and it said, "No coordinates found." Like, what? Each time we both tried to put in the address, nothing came up. And the strangest thing is that leading up to this point, there wasn't a single problem. And mind you, our service was fine. It's not like we couldn't use the app at all. At this point, we were terrified, because it's just us two in the middle of nowhere, and there isn't a single house or even a building in sight. We stopped at some random sign to redirect our apps and try to find the issue, and a little bit behind some trees, due to the road being curvy, we saw some lights. So we turned to head down the road in hopes for a gas station, house, a church, just absolutely anything. And I cannot make this up. As we turn down the road, we see the source of the lights. There is a motorcycle with all of its lights turned on, just sitting in the middle of the road. Nobody around. Us being two women, obviously the first thing that pops up in our head is human trafficking. So we are panicking, thinking that it's a trap. We pull up a tiny bit closer because as we are looking, we see one single shoe and an all-white helmet just on the ground by the bike. So, at this point, we call the cops, and tell them we are in Blackwell, but have no idea where exactly we are, and that we are positive that we just found a wreck and that there is no person in sight. We just explain to them what we see. During all this, we are trying to decide if we should get out of the car or not, because we are still scared, but not too terrified, knowing that the cops are on their way. But as I look outside of Ali's window, I see that there is a man covered in blood. He is missing a shoe and his clothes are ripped. I verbally screamed as he scared me so badly. My hands felt numb. He was standing there, looking inside our vehicle. Ali cracked the window a very tiny bit, just enough to ask him if he was okay. And he didn't mutter a single word. Not a single sound came from his lips. At this point, we are terrified. She has her concealed carry, so she grabs her gun, as ready as possible to protect us if this man does anything too crazy. But in the back of my mind, I am trying to convince myself maybe he's just stunned or freaked out because he just had an awful wreck. But the bike being in the middle of the road with the lights on and him covered in blood? Come on now. If you haven't paid any attention before in this story, this is the exact moment you need to start. An all-black Ford Ranger truck pulls up behind our vehicle, and these two middle-aged men get out trying to see if everything is okay, and he grabs the guy's shoe and tries to talk to him and figure out what happened. Just a minute later, the paramedics and a state trooper pulls up behind us also, so that was very relieving. As I stay in the driver's seat, Ali gets out to talk to the guys from the Ford Ranger. And remember this truck, because it comes back later on. She tells this guy we are trying to find the Blackwell Bridge when we came across this wreck, and the guy proceeded to say, I have lived in Blackwell my entire life. I grew up here, and I have no idea what bridge you are talking about. This was suspicious, because most people know of the Blackwell area, and I know a lot of people who have been to this bridge, including my own parents. Well, I talked to the state trooper. I told him that the guy was really weird when we were trying to see if he was alright, and I just told him what we experienced. Ali had talked to the other cop who gave her directions to get to the bridge, but he told us to not get on it because he's scared that something will happen. A literal police officer told her this. Then, about 10 minutes goes by and everyone's cleared out. It was just me and Ali back on the side of the road. We traveled down until we got on the old upper Blackwell Bridge Road. We start to see the bridge in the distance, but we also see something else. The exact black Ford Ranger with the two guys who stopped at the wreck. The ones who told us they didn't know a single thing about the bridge. We hit it in reverse and left. I don't know if I'll ever try to find this stupid bridge again. Man, it sounds so fake, but it's not. It was like out of a damn movie. The second story has been posted by user :alter:reality:. To start off, I would like to say that I am an avid RVer and have traveled coast to coast in the USA with my wife, children, and dog. We have been deep in the woods and have heard strange noises, stayed in cities riddled with crime, and never had I felt out of control or uneasy. That was until White City, New Mexico. If you are unfamiliar with the area, there is almost nothing but desert in the surrounding areas. Roswell, New Mexico is only about an hour and a half north of White City. The area has many boogeymen in the surrounding folklore, things ranging from skinwalkers, kidnappers, aliens, and more. White City, which sits just outside the entrance to Carlsbad Caverns, has a population of 85, according to a quick Google search. At first, upon setting up camp, things felt off, for a lack of a better word. But with nothing to point at as a reason why, I kept my mouth shut, so as to not spook my wife or kids for no reason. But the entire time, it felt as if we were being watched, and every turn I made, I expected to find something, only to find nothing. Until I walked my dog later that night. My dog, a 2-year-old Australian Shepherd, is very friendly and aloof. Up to this point, he had never shown any signs of aggression and only exhibited sweet behaviors. It had just gotten dark, and due to a long day of traveling, he needed a walk badly. At new places, I always keep him leashed, and as we started around the abandoned city, I thought I saw a shadow figure moving next to the restaurant building across the street. I focused my vision, but nothing. So I thought nothing of it and kept walking. Then, out of nowhere, my dog jumped to attention and started ferociously barking and growling into the dark shadow near where I saw the movement. I had never heard anything close to that come from him ever before or even since, but there was nothing there. Yet still, he was frothing and snarling and growling. I had to drag him back to camp, confused, but still I kept quiet about it and decided to just shrug it off. I kept a closer eye on my family that night. We left the next day, and my wife remarked, "So glad we're leaving this place. It gives me the creeps." I asked her why, and she just told me, "I don't know. It's just creepy here." So I look up reviews of the campsite, and another camper said they felt the same way as us, and that upon returning to his camp spot after a long day of exploring, he saw a dozen cloaked and hooded people holding candles, doing some weird ritual nearby the campsite. I then took a deep dive on the internet and couldn't find anything else with regards to White City. But there was also an old stone castle type structure on the hill above the campsite. I intended on going to check it out, but I got spooked after what happened with my dog and the other camp review I had read. So I don't know what or who is lurking around that place, but I am not interested in going back anytime soon. The caverns were neat though, but the whole place had some serious Texas Chainsaw type vibes, where maybe the reason there aren't more stories are because those who would tell them don't make it out, and perhaps more people are involved. The third story has been posted by user both_canary 1508. I grew up on the top of this mountain that was mostly abandoned since the 60s when an old ski kill burned down. There were two other full-time residents up at the top, where we lived. The rest of the houses stood empty the majority of the time, or were abandoned. The history of this mountain dates far back, hundreds of years back. Before even the colonization of Canada, there were two native communities at war. One lived on top of this mountain, and the other lived in the valley below. At the base of the mountain, the two communities were supposed to meet for battle. During the journey down, the valley tribe snuck up behind the mountain tribe and slaughtered all their women and children. When the mountain tribe returned home, they were apparently slaughtered too. On the entire mountainside, these whining wild strawberries grow, and it's said they grow from the spilt blood of the mountain tribe. Many people have died on this mountain. When I was just growing up, there were hundreds of old crosses littering the twists and turns of the mountain. My father later became one of those crosses. In a small meadow surrounded by trees sat a small cottage. No driveways, and only an overgrown pathway to lead you to it. If you looked inside, their breakfast sat, still prepared, oatmeal and eggs, untouched for years. The man that lived there was supposedly a fugitive who disappeared further into the mountain when the police came up and found him one day. We had these weird neighbors who would come 2 weekends a month from the city with their daughter, who was roughly my age. They would bring friends over, get high, drunk, and naked, and do non-family friendly things in their yard or the forest. There was this eerie feeling you had while on this mountain, which was aptly named Forbidden. I stood looking out my bedroom window at night, and I swear I could see things moving in the forest below. We had the highest concentration of mountain lions in the world, and I was often stalked home. One night, my mother woke to the sound of the sliding door opening and closing. She walked downstairs, and my sister was standing there, sleepwalking, whispering over and over, "Here, kitty, kitty." My sister had never been a sleepwalker until this. My mother grabbed her, closed and locked the sliding door, then flicked on the lights. And right there, on the deck, pacing back and forth, was a cougar. My father also became a violent sleepwalker while living up there. He would have screaming matches with the wall. Sometimes he ended up throwing items around. This wasn't something he did until the last few years of his life. My father was a skilled driver and had driven up this mountain and many narrower, steeper logging roads around the area many times. A few months before the accident, I started having waking nightmares of my father's death. Something was telling me he was going to die. I remember waking up frequently and looking out the window into the forest during this period and feeling like something was communicating with me that he would soon die. He kissed me goodnight one night and went out the door to go to the town with his friends. They left in separate vehicles, him first. From the accounts of what happened, it was a freak accident. They were driving below the speed limit down a straight stretch nearing a cliff when my dad's truck suddenly lost traction and started skidding sideways towards the cliff. My dad opened the truck door and jumped out, but the truck suddenly veered the other way and flipped onto him on the ground. something that physically shouldn't have been possible. It crushed almost every bone in his body. He survived for 8 days in the hospital after being airlifted. The day he died, I knew again. I knew he was dead, and it was like this feeling that something was communicating this to me. I didn't even need to be told. I was so sure of this feeling that I collapsed onto the ground the second I felt it and started screaming about my father's death. I was 8. I had never experienced death before. There's a lot more that went on up there to a lot of different people over the years. It's known locally as a haunted and strange place. Nothing good ever happens there. People do weird and crazy out of character things, commit heinous crimes, die, or just lose their minds. We moved when I was 9. I never felt that feeling again anywhere else. That feeling of something insidious all around you. I've only been up there a handful of times since, and every time that feeling returns. The fourth story has been posed by user rap_comprehensive. This is an encounter that my mother and uncle experienced as kids in the 1970s in Tijuana, Mexico. When I was younger, my mom and my uncle would tell this story to us, and I always thought it was a ghost story, but recently I've been thinking of it as an encounter. Please do let me know if you've had similar experiences and if you believe their story was an encounter as well. My mom lived with her older sister, older brother, and mom in a very old apartment complex. The complex was owned by my mother's aunt, but my grandma would run it to make money. The apartment complex was quite large, but the only bathroom they had was quite far away from where they would sleep. My grandma took over a couple of the rooms on one side of the complex since they weren't being rented. There were around 3 to 4 rooms, and they were being used as storage. One room was a bedroom, and my mom couldn't recall what the other rooms had. In the actual apartment that was next to those rooms, they had a kitchen, a TV, and a room where they would all sleep together. Because the building was pretty old, most of these rooms didn't have light, but the actual apartment did. Since the bathroom was really far away, my grandma would have my mom and her brother bring in a urine bucket at night. But since back then there were barely any lights, the night would be very dark, and it would make my uncle and mom super nervous. They would have to carry with them a cable light. So then one night, again, my grandma forced them to go get the bucket, and they both nervously hurried to go get it while carrying the cable light. They got the bucket out of the room, and as they were heading back, my uncle noticed a firelight in the patio and immediately shields my mom and starts shaking. My mom, confused, tries to see what it is. The way she described it is like a fire-like projection, but not red, more like a whiter, bleaker fire. They both run to try to go back to the main apartment, but their older sister, to mess with them, locked the door and wouldn't let them in. My uncle, out of fear, takes off, leaving my mom behind. My mom was so scared that, out of shock, she falls to the floor and observes a shadow creature running out of the light. She described this creature around a child's size. She noticed its eyes. They were a grayish, translucent color and slightly bigger than a normal person's eyes. My uncle, as he was running, trips over a stair and then watched the shadow run until it just disappeared. Once my mom's sister finally lets them in, they couldn't stop crying. They couldn't sleep or talk. They were traumatized for years. My grandma would try to make them explain. Other people believed that my grandma needed to dig out the patio because the shadow creature might have let them know that there's treasure. My grandma believed that if she dug out the entire patio, she would inevitably find something bad. So that's how that happened. For a while, my mom and her brother weren't the same. And then, when they finally were able to talk about it, my mom realized that it wasn't just a child's imagination. I think this story is really interesting because usually an experience like this happens to just one person, and such it can be discredited as a hallucination or such. But to two people, perhaps they really did see this shadow creature. The mysteries of the supernatural realm are utterly perplexing. Throughout my limited time as an explorer of the unknown, if you will, I've come to observe that these extraordinary entities exhibit strangely human-like traits. Picture this: a mischievous poltergeist playfully rattling objects in your room just to elicit a fearful reaction before vanishing into the shadows. Or imagine a ghostly apparition hovering at a distance, observing your every move, but never quite revealing itself in full clarity. These peculiar habits bear an uncanny resemblance to the attention-seeking antics of a petulant child or the thrill-seeking escapades of a rebellious teenager. Of course, we must acknowledge the stark differences, one being ethereal and the others bound by flesh and blood. Nevertheless, whether my narrations have captivated your imagination or not, I sincerely wish you a most pleasant remainder of the day, filled with serenity and wonder.